The morning calm shattered with the thunderous roar of helicopter blades cutting through the sky. Our quiet, suburban street transformed into a scene straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster. Neighbors spilled onto their lawns, coffee mugs in hand, pajama pants flapping in the breeze, phones raised high to capture every second of the madness. And then came the shriek. Karen, our self-appointed HOA queen, burst out in a silk bathrobe, her hair wild eyes blazing with panic. She screamed as heavy chains locked around her precious Lexus the SUV. She wielded like a crown and a weapon. With a slow, majestic lift, the car rose off the ground, dangling helplessly in the air. Sunlight flashed across the windshield, brilliant and blinding, as gasps and cheers erupted from the crowd. My driveway was finally clear, but Karen's reign was about to crash down in spectacular fashion. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? When people ask me what it's like living under an HOA, I tell them imagine a circus without clowns, because here the neighbors are the clowns. And leading this parade of nonsense, Karen, president of the HOA, self-proclaimed savior of the subdivision and part-time dictator with a clipboard. I'd been living in Maple Crest for over 15 years. Bought the house back when the neighborhood was still simple, kids on bikes, barbecues on the weekends, and neighbors who minded their own business. But then Karen showed up. The day she moved in, it was as if the air itself got heavier. She strutted down the sidewalks like she owned the asphalt, barking at kids to stay off her grass, measuring hedges with a ruler, and writing violation notices like they were love letters to herself. Now, I'd had run-ins with her before. She didn't like my rose bushes, said they were untamed, and in violation of community aesthetics. Untamed. Like they were wild lions instead of flowers. I told her politely that my roses had been there longer than the HOA charter. She sneered and said rules are rules. That was Karen's mantra. Except funny enough, rules never seemed to apply to her. So imagine my delight when I woke up one sunny Tuesday morning, walked out with my cup of coffee, and saw a gleaming white Lexus SUV parked sideways across my garage. Not in front of the curb, not on the street. No. She had nosed it directly across my driveway, blocking both my garage doors with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the move. At first I thought maybe it was some accident. Maybe she'd lost control. But then I saw it, the smug little note under my windshield wiper. In big block letters, perhaps this will remind you that no one is above HOA compliance. Trim the roses, or next time I'll have your car booted. Signed, of course, HOA President Karen. I swear, I nearly spit my coffee all over the hood. This woman had parked her car in my driveway to punish me for not cutting flowers. Flowers. By mid-morning, the entire cul-de-sac had gathered. Some neighbors came out to walk their dogs, but we all knew they were here for the show. A couple of teenagers sat on their bikes filming, whispering like sports commentators. "Oh man, he's not going to let that slide," one said. I stepped outside calm as a monk coffee still in hand. "Karen," I called loud enough for the peanut gallery to hear, "would you mind moving your tank off my driveway?" From across the street, her front door flew open. Out she marched, designer sunglasses, perched on her nose, hair sprayed into a helmet, clipboard clutched like a judge's gavel. "Excuse me," she snapped. "This is a lawful immobilization of property. You've repeatedly refused to comply with HOA standards. Until you do, your access is revoked." I blinked. "Revoked, Karen, this is my garage. My driveway. My property." She smirked. "You signed the covenant when you moved in. The HOA has the right to enforce compliance measures," the crowd murmured. I could see neighbors biting their lips to keep from laughing. But Karen wasn't joking. She truly believed she was judge, jury, and sheriff of Maple Crest. I set my coffee down on the hood of her Lexus very gently. Her gasp could have shattered glass. "Move it," I said, "or I'll have it towed." Her lips curled into a smile I can only describe as villainous. "Go ahead," she purred. "I already called the towing company. They're under contract with us. They won't touch my car." And just like that, she turned and strutted back inside, leaving her luxury SUV sprawled across my property like a throne in the middle of a battlefield. The neighbors buzzed. One man whispered, "He's done for." Another shook her head, muttering, "She's gone too far this time." Phones kept recording because that's what people do these days, watch other people's misery through screens. I looked at the Lexus, polished to a shine, parked like a barricade against my freedom, and then I looked at the roses. The absurdity of it all hit me in waves. I wasn't just blocked from my garage, I was being publicly humiliated, punished, like a child who refused to clean his room. But here's the thing about me, I don't break easily, and when I do, I don't just break, I build. Plans, schemes, entire blueprints of poetic justice. That evening, when the sun dipped low and Karen's Lexus still sat smugly across my garage, I knew this wasn't about flowers. This wasn't about aesthetic standards or rose bushes. This was about power. She wanted to show the neighborhood that she could crush anyone who defied her. Well, if power was the game I was about to show her, what happens when the wrong man decides to play? Because in that moment, as I stared at her luxury car gleaming under the streetlight, an idea sparked in my mind, one that would take this HOA feud to heights she could never have imagined. Literally. By day 2, Karen's Lexus had become more than just a car. It was a monument. A shiny smug blockade that screamed, "I own you." Every time I stepped outside, there it was a $70,000 roadblock, gleaming like Excalibur stuck in stone, except no hero was pulling this thing out. Neighbors treated it like an attraction. Kids circled on their bikes, pointing and giggling. Joggers slowed their pace just to snap photos. One guy even set up a lawn chair across the street, sipping lemonade while giving play-by-play updates to anyone who walked by. And Karen, she loved every second. She paraded around in her oversized sun hat and pink tracksuit, waving to people like she was hosting a neighborhood festival. "That's what happens when you don't follow the rules," she'd say loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm just maintaining order." Order, sure. If by order she meant chaos dressed up in designer sunglasses. On the third morning, I caught her out front, holding court like a queen in exile. Clipboard in hand, she lectured 3 poor souls about their recycling bins not being color-coordinated with the HOA-approved palette. All the while, her Lexus still straddled my driveway, casting a long, shiny shadow across my garage doors. Finally, I walked over. Calm collected my voice, dripping with sarcasm. "Morning, Karen. Just curious, how long are you planning to run this little garage blockade festival?" She didn't even look at me. "Until compliance is achieved," she said, scribbling furiously on her clipboard. "Compliance," I repeated. "Karen, these are roses. Not toxic waste. Roses." She turned then, lowering her sunglasses with a theatrical flair. Her eyes glittered with triumph. "Rules are rules. And until you cut them down to regulation height, you'll find your property access restricted." The neighbors leaned in, phones, angled lenses zooming. It was no longer just a conflict, it was a spectacle. I swear I could hear the faint hum of a live stream notification pinging in the distance. I laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite laugh, but a full, booming laugh that echoed down the cul-de-sac. "You're really proud of yourself, huh?" she sniffed. "Someone has to maintain standards around here. Otherwise, Maple Crest will look like, she waved vaguely at my lawn. "Like this." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My lawn was immaculate, better than most on the block. This wasn't about landscaping. This was about Karen flexing her HOA crown in front of an audience. But the thing about audiences is this: they remember the show, not the rules. And Karen was giving them a show they'd never forget. That evening, I watched from my porch as Karen strutted back to her Lexus, patting the hood like it was a faithful guard dog. "Good work today," she murmured, loud enough for me to hear. Then she walked inside, leaving the car like a sentry across my garage. I took a sip of my bourbon, and a thought hit me like a lightning strike: she wasn't moving that car anytime soon. She wanted it there. It was her victory flag. Fine, let her wave it. Because the higher she climbed on her little tower of arrogance, the harder she'd fall when I kicked it out from under her. The next morning, I tried the police not because I thought they'd help, but because I wanted the comedy. Sure enough, the officer who answered chuckled and said, "Sorry, sir, sounds like a civil matter. We can't tow without a direct violation of city code." "Civil matter," I muttered after hanging up. "That's HOA code for you're on your own." So I checked with towing companies. Guess what? Karen had them all in her pocket. She'd arranged a community towing contract months earlier. They wouldn't touch her Lexus even if I paid triple. That's when it hit me. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought she'd built herself a fortress of rules and contracts. But I've never been much of a rule follower. And when the rulebook's rigged, the only thing to do is change the game. The neighborhood gossip reached fever pitch by day 5. People whispered about how I hadn't backed down, how Karen was pushing harder than ever, how the tension was thick enough to cut with hedge clippers. Even folks who hated my roses started rooting for me just to see Karen lose. One neighbor, old Mr. Jenkins, shuffled up to me while I was checking the mail. He leaned in and said, "Son, I've lived here 30 years. Nobody stood up to that woman and lived to tell the tale. But I've got a feeling," he winked, "you might be the one to do it." I smiled. "Don't worry, Mr. Jenkins. I've got a plan." And oh, did I. Because the truth was, I had connections Karen didn't know about. Friends in high places, or rather friends who could fly high places. All I had to do was bide my time, let her dig herself deeper, and wait for the perfect moment to pull the rug out, so I let her Lexus sit there like a monument. I let her preen in front of the neighbors, soaking in her 15 minutes of fame. I let her believe she'd won. And every night as I sipped bourbon on my porch and watched her smug shadow disappear behind her curtains, I planned, I mapped, I prepared. Because if Karen wanted to humiliate me publicly, I was about to return the favor on a scale so grand she'd never recover. After all, if she could turn my driveway into her stage, I could turn her car into my prop. And soon, very soon, Maplecrest was going to see a show unlike anything they'd ever imagined. There's a saying I heard once, never wrestle with pigs, you both get dirty, but the pig likes it. Karen was my pig, and brother, she loved the mud, but unlike most folks in Maplecrest, I wasn't afraid of dirt. I'd built my life out of it literally. My business was small scale, contracting and logistics. Dump trucks, forklifts, cranes, you name it, I had access. And more importantly, I had friends who owed me favors. So as I sat on my porch bourbon glass, sweating in the evening heat, I started sketching out a plan that would turn Karen's smug little blockade into the greatest HOA scandal this side of the county line. First idea, hire a tow truck from out of state. But I knew Karen had that covered. She had a network of towing contracts tighter than Fort Knox. Not worth the risk. Second idea, slash her tires. Tempting. Very tempting. But too obvious, too petty. I wasn't going to stoop to vandalism. No, I wanted something poetic, something unforgettable. And then it hit me. I was flipping through old contacts on my phone when I saw the name Rodney Roeder Alvarez, an old buddy from my contracting days. He'd gone on to run a helicopter lifting service out near the industrial yards. Heavy lift choppers, the kind that could pick up shipping containers like they were Legos. And right then the vision crystallized. Karen wanted to block my driveway, fine. I'd make sure the entire neighborhood watched as her beloved Lexus went airborne literally. Now I knew it couldn't just be a stunt, it had to be airtight, legally speaking. Karen was the queen of lawsuits and I wasn't giving her that ammo. So I started digging. I pored over the HOA charter city ordinances, parking laws, even nuisance statutes. And wouldn't you know it, parking across someone's driveway wasn't just rude, it was illegal. Technically, her Lexus was trespassing on my property. And trespassing property can be removed by reasonable means. Was airlifting a car by helicopter reasonable? Maybe not in most neighborhoods. But Maplecrest had never met me. Still, I wanted backup. So, I consulted a lawyer, buddy of mine, nothing formal, just a beer over lunch. I laid out the scenario without names. He smirked, took a sip and said, "If it's blocking your garage and you've got evidence, technically it's trespass. Just don't drop it on a freeway or something." I nodded. "What about, say, a lawn?" He raised an eyebrow. "As long as you've got permission, it's your circus." Permission. That was the key. See, I knew Karen wasn't acting alone. She had allies on the HOA board, sure, but her biggest enabler was the mayor. Turns out the two of them were golf buddies, thick as thieves. Rumor was Karen had donated a hefty chunk to his last campaign. In return, he turned a blind eye to her creative interpretation of HOA power. So what better place to return her little gift than right on his perfectly manicured front lawn? It was poetic symmetry. Her weapon of control, her Lexus, dumped like a spoiled child's toy at the feet of the man who'd allowed her to run wild. I could already see it, cameras flashing, neighbors cheering, Karen screaming. A scandal big enough to shake Maplecrest to its foundation. Now all I had to do was set the trap. I called Rodney. "Hey Roeder," I said, using his old nickname. "You still running that heavy lift service? You know it," he replied, his voice buzzing with the excitement of a man who loved machinery more than people. "What do you need?" "Moved." I hesitated, savoring the moment. "A car." Silence. Then laughter. "A car, man, my birds carry steel beams, not Toyotas." "It's not a Toyota," I said. "It's a Lexus. And it's parked illegally across my garage." His laughter stopped. "Illegally, yep. Got photos, got witnesses, got everything I need. Question is, can you airlift it without scratching the paint?" I swear I could hear his grin through the phone. "Send me the address. I'll make it happen." We picked Saturday morning. Early enough that the whole neighborhood would be awake, late enough that people would still be lounging in their robes and slippers, prime audience conditions. I didn't advertise it, but I dropped a few subtle hints to trusted neighbors. "Might want to have your phones ready Saturday," I told Jenkins. His old eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas. Meanwhile, I played it cool with Karen. Every time I saw her, I acted resigned, defeated even. I let her think she'd won. One afternoon, she caught me staring at her Lexus, and she smirked. "Getting used to the view?" she asked. I shrugged. "Guess so. You've got me beat, Karen. She beamed like a queen accepting tribute. That's what happens when you fight the HOA. Oh, Karen, if only you knew what was coming. The night before the big event, I hardly slept. I sat at my kitchen table, maps and photos spread out, checking every detail. Rodney had his rigging gear ready. Chains, straps, hooks, all industrial grade. We'd done risk assessments. We'd rehearsed the lift on paper. It was foolproof. By the time the sun started to rise on Saturday, I was buzzing with anticipation. I poured my coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and looked at the Lexus, gleaming in the early light. Tomorrow, it wouldn't be here. Tomorrow, it would be the centerpiece of the greatest HOA drama Maplecrest had ever seen. And when it was over, Karen would learn the most important lesson of her life. Don't start a war with a man who knows how to fly. Saturday morning in Maplecrest usually meant quiet lawns, the smell of fresh-cut grass, and maybe the sound of kids pedaling their bikes before the heat set in. But not this Saturday. This Saturday, the cul-de-sac was about to host an event so outrageous, so unforgettable, that people would still be whispering about it years later at neighborhood barbecues. And the best part, nobody, least of all Karen, saw it coming. I started the day like any other coffee-in-hand robe tied loosely, acting like the most ordinary suburban dad on the block. I strolled out to pick up my paper, even though I hadn't subscribed in years. Jenkins still tossed me his copy, and I made sure to glance at Karen's Lexus with that same defeated look I'd perfected. Karen spotted me from across the street. She was already outside, sipping what she probably called a detox smoothie, but looked suspiciously like a neon swamp in a glass. "Good morning," she called sweetly, though her tone carried the smugness of a cat that just ate a canary. "Morning," I replied, keeping my voice low, weary. "Guess I'll just mow around your car today." She laughed, a sharp grating sound that carried across the lawns. "See, you're learning. Compliance doesn't have to be painful." Oh, if only she knew. Inside my house, every detail of the operation was already in motion. Rodney had texted at 6:30 sharp, bird warmed up. ETA 900. Weather's clear, we're good to fly. My heart thudded with anticipation. 9 o'clock meant the neighborhood would be wide awake, sipping coffee, scrolling on their porches, ready to be entertained. It was perfect. But I couldn't tip my hand too soon. So I went about my morning routine deliberately slow. I hosed down my roses, hummed an old tune, waved politely to neighbors gathering like birds on a wire. Jenkins caught my eye and gave me a wink so exaggerated it could have been seen from space. He knew. A few others knew too, just enough to guarantee the crowd would be ready with cameras when the time came. Meanwhile, Karen had doubled down on her public humiliation campaign. Around 8:15, she held an impromptu HOA sermon right there on her lawn. Clipboard in hand, she barked about recycling bins, garage paint colors, and community standards. At one point, she jabbed her pen toward me. And some people, she declared, still refused to take responsibility for their landscaping violations. But rest assured, the HOA board has ways of making sure everyone complies, one way or another, neighbors murmured. A few rolled their eyes, others filmed. Karen mistook their silence for obedience, basking in her authority like a general before battle. I glanced at my watch. 8, 5, 2. Time to move. I slipped inside and made one last call to Rodney. "You're good, engine's hot," he said over the muffled roar of rotors. "See you in 3 minutes." I stepped back out onto my porch, trying to act casual, though the buzz in the air was electric. The first faint thump, thump, thump echoed over the horizon. Heads turned. Dogs barked. Coffee mugs froze mid-sip. Karen frowned, shading her eyes. What on earth? The sound grew louder, closer, until even the most oblivious neighbor realized something big was coming. A heavy-lift helicopter crested the tree line, its blades chopping the air like a giant war drum. Sunlight flashed off its windows, and the downdraft sent tree branches swaying. Gasps rippled through the cul-de-sac. Phones went up instantly. "Oh my God, is that?" someone whispered. Karen squinted, confused, but annoyed, as though a helicopter had the audacity to intrude on her kingdom. "This is a residential neighborhood," she screeched. "Who allowed?" Then the chopper lowered, hovering directly above her Lexus. The roar was deafening. Wind whipped across the lawns, sending papers flying and knocking over a couple of lawn chairs. Neighbors clutched their hair, their hats, their lattes. Karen stumbled, her robe flapping wildly. What is this?" she shrieked. And that's when Rodney's team rappelled down like commandos, quick and precise. In seconds, industrial-grade chains were looped around the Lexus, hooked tight, double-checked. The crowd was ecstatic, filming every moment. Laughter and cheers mixed with the thundering blades. Jenkins shouted over the noise. "It's happening! He's doing it!" Karen was beside herself. She charged forward, screaming at the riggers. "Stop, that's my car. I'm the HOA president. I demand you stop." But her voice was drowned out by the roar of the engine. Her precious Lexus rose tires, leaving the pavement chains clinking. Up, it went like some bizarre suburban rapture until it dangled 10 feet off the ground. Sunlight bounced off its polished windshield, blinding in its brilliance. The neighbors gasped, then erupted into wild applause. Karen fell to her knees, clutching at the air, shrieking like she'd lost a child. "Put it down. You can't do this. This is illegal." But oh, it wasn't. I had my paperwork, my evidence, my witnesses. Every second was filmed, documented, her trespass, my removal. And as the helicopter began to ascend, carrying her Lexus higher and higher, the scene became something out of pure cinematic glory. Phones captured it from every angle. Kids screamed with joy. Adults laughed like they'd been freed from a tyrant. I just stood there sipping my coffee robe, flapping in the wind, watching Karen's empire literally fly away. But the best part, the pièce de résistance, was that the neighbors thought this was the grand finale. They thought the Lexus was headed to some impound lot, or maybe dropped in a field. They had no idea where it was really going, and neither did Karen. There's a moment when revenge stops being an idea and becomes real. For me, it was the instant Karen's Lexus left the pavement. 1 second, it was a smug blockade gleaming in my driveway. The next, it was swaying in the sky, dangling like a Christmas ornament from the belly of Rodney's helicopter. The roar was deafening. The downdraft flattened the grass, sent hats flying, and nearly knocked Jenkins off his lawn chair. Kids shrieked with joy, sprinting across lawns like it was the 4th of July. Adults stood rooted, phones held high, recording every insane second. And then there was Karen. She was a vision of chaos, bathrobe flapping like a cape hair, whipping into a stormy halo face twisted with panic and rage. She sprinted beneath the helicopter arms, waving, screaming so hard, her voice cracked. "That's my car. Put it down. I am the HOA president." The irony was delicious. For years, she'd used that Lexus as a weapon, a shiny chariot of intimidation. Now it dangled helplessly above her, a $70,000 puppet on strings she couldn't control. Rodney's team worked like professionals. One guy guided the lift with hand signals, another double-checked the chains mid-air. They weren't fazed by Karen's banshee wailing. To them, this was just another job, no different than hauling steel beams off a construction site. But to us, to the neighborhood, this was theater. Pure, glorious theater. "Holy crap, it's actually happening," one neighbor gasped, his phone shaking. Another shouted, "She's losing her mind. Look at her face." Karen fell to her knees in the middle of the cul-de-sac, clutching at the air like she could lasso her Lexus back down with sheer willpower. She screamed every threat in her arsenal: lawsuits, fines, police, city hall. None of it mattered. Her words were swallowed by the thumping blades and the roar of the crowd. And me, I just stood on my porch calm as a monk, coffee in hand. My robe flapped in the wind, my bare feet planted firmly on the porch boards. If someone painted the scene, they'd have titled it "The Eye of the Storm." The Lexus rose higher chains, taut sunlight glinting off its windshield in blinding flashes. At one point, the morning sun hit just right and the whole thing shimmered like a diamond in the sky. It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Karen, however, was not. She stumbled forward, nearly face-planting on the asphalt, shrieking with the kind of primal desperation usually reserved for soap operas. "You can't do this. This is illegal. I'll have your house condemned." The neighbors laughed. Actually laughed. Even the ones who normally cowered under her clipboard tyranny couldn't hold it in anymore. One woman shouted, "Looks like your car's finally HOA compliant. Karen, it's off the street." The cul-de-sac erupted into laughter so loud it nearly drowned out the chopper. Karen spun, face red, pointing wildly at me. You're behind this. You'll pay for this." I lifted my coffee mug in a casual salute. "Good morning, Karen." Her scream could have shattered windows. The helicopter began to bank, carrying the Lexus slowly upward and out of the cul-de-sac. People chased it down the street, phones raised like paparazzi. The car swayed slightly, its chrome trim flashing like a disco ball. Every second was cinematic gold. And yet, even as the crowd whooped and hollered, I stayed cool. Because unlike them, I knew the full script. They thought the Lexus was headed to a storage yard or maybe dumped in an empty lot. But no, this was Act 1. Karen stumbled after the chopper robe, dragging slippers, slapping against the pavement. "Bring it back, you can't take it, that's mine." The irony nearly killed me. The queen of HOA enforcement reduced to a wailing neighbor, chasing her car like a child chasing a balloon. The helicopter gained altitude, rising above the rooftops. The Lexus dangled higher, becoming a bizarre suburban spectacle visible for blocks. Folks who had no stake in the drama stepped out of their houses, shading their eyes, asking, "What in God's name is going on?" "It's Karen's car," someone shouted. "They're airlifting her car, that was enough." Suddenly, the whole neighborhood was in on it, swarming sidewalks, pointing, filming, laughing. Karen had wanted to humiliate me, but in the end she humiliated herself, center stage spotlight blazing. Rodney's voice crackled through my earpiece. "We're secure. Chains are good. Heading to drop point." I smirked. "Copy that. Make it memorable." Karen was still in the street, shaking her fists at the sky like some furious dictator watching her empire crumble. She screamed my name over and over, promising lawsuits, exile, eternal damnation, but her words were meaningless. The sight of her precious Lexus swaying in the morning light had already burned itself into Maple Crest legend. As the chopper disappeared toward the horizon, the crowd began to disperse, buzzing like they'd just witnessed the Super Bowl. People slapped me on the back, whispered, legendary, shook their heads in disbelief. Jenkins leaned in, eyes sparkling. "Son, you've done it. You've actually done it." I just smiled. "Oh, Jenkins, you haven't seen anything yet. Because this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. The Lexus wasn't going to an impound lot or a warehouse, or even back to Karen's driveway. No, its final destination was something far more poetic. Something that would hit Karen harder than any fine, any HOA hearing, any petty clipboard scribble. It was headed straight for the mayor's front lawn. The same mayor who had empowered Karen backed her petty tyranny and let her rule Maple Crest like a dictator. And when that helicopter dropped her car onto his manicured grass in front of half the city's social elite, the fallout would be nuclear. I took one last sip of my coffee, savoring the calm after the storm. Karen thought she'd seen humiliation. She had no idea. The real show was only just beginning. The helicopter's thumping faded into the distance, but the buzz in Maple Crest only grew louder. Neighbors lingered in clusters, rewatching their videos, laughing, replaying the sight of Karen's Lexus dangling in the air like some oversized Christmas ornament. Karen, meanwhile, was a wreck. She collapsed in the middle of the cul-de-sac, her robe-twisted hair in disarray, mascara smudged into black streaks. She looked less like the HOA president and more like a washed-up villain at the end of a bad soap opera. But even then, she still managed to screech, "He'll pay for this. You'll all pay." If only she knew how far the spectacle was about to travel. See, Rodney and I hadn't just picked any drop-off location. We wanted irony, we wanted justice, and we wanted maximum audience exposure. So we picked the one man who had quietly fueled Karen's reign of terror, Mayor Douglas Whitfield. Doug was a slick operator. A politician who wore golf shirts like armor and thought handshakes were a form of currency. He and Karen were thick as thieves. She cut checks for his campaign. He gave her free reign over Maple Crest. Together they turned the HOA into a dictatorship. So, where better to deliver her prized Lexus than his perfectly manicured country club approved, front lawn Rodney's chopper thundered over the city, the Lexus swaying beneath it like a bizarre chandelier. Cars pulled over. Pedestrians pointed and shouted. People leaned out of office windows with their phones. By the time they reached the mayor's gated estate, half the town already knew something insane was happening. Social media lit up. Helicopter carrying a car downtown, one post read. "What the heck is going on?" another said, accompanied by shaky footage of the Lexus dangling over Main Street. And then came the drop. Mayor Whitfield was in the middle of hosting a weekend brunch on his lawn, a real who's who of city elites. Council members, donors, golf buddies. Champagne glasses clinked, laughter floated through the air, a string quartet played something delicate. Until the shadow fell. The guests looked up, shielding their eyes as the helicopter descended, blades, whipping tablecloths and sending napkins flying. The string quartet scattered. Plates of eggs Benedict toppled. And there, dangling above them, like divine judgment, was Karen's gleaming white Lexus. Gasps, screams, chaos. Women clutched their pearls. Men grabbed their cell phones. One guy dropped an entire bottle of Dom Perignon on the grass. The mayor himself stumbled forward, his face pale as milk. What is this?" he bellowed, his comb-over flapping in the wind. Rodney maneuvered with surgical precision, lowering the car onto the mayor's pristine emerald green lawn. The Lexus landed with a dull, heavy thud, flattening a patch of grass worth more per square foot than some houses. The chains unclamped, the helicopter rose, and just like that, it was done. The Lexus sat there, absurd and regal, smack in the middle of the mayor's brunch. A symbol, a message, a middle finger dressed in chrome. Phones captured every angle: the mayor's horrified face, his guests scattering the helicopter, peeling away into the sky. Within minutes, the footage exploded online. Mayor's lawn Lexus trended on Twitter. Memes sprouted faster than dandelions. Back in Maple Crest, neighbors huddled around screens, jaws dropping as they realized where the car had gone. Even Jenkins nearly spit out his dentures. On the mayor's lawn, he wheezed between fits of laughter. "Boy, you've outdone yourself." Karen, however, wasn't laughing. She staggered into her house, then re-emerged with her phone glued to her ear. "Mayor Whitfield," she screamed into the receiver, her voice cracking. "They stole my car. They put it on your." She couldn't finish the sentence. She choked on it. From what I later heard, the mayor wasn't sympathetic. Word is he tore into her, screaming that she'd embarrassed him in front of donors, that she'd brought scandal to his doorstep. For once, Karen was on the receiving end of the fury she'd so often unleashed. By evening, the news trucks had arrived. Local anchors stood in front of the mayor's estate microphones, trembling in the rotor wash of replayed helicopter footage. In an unprecedented act of suburban warfare, one reporter said gravely, a resident's vehicle was airlifted from a neighborhood driveway and deposited on the mayor's front lawn during a private brunch event. The motives remain under investigation, but sources say the vehicle belonged to none other than HOA President Karen Whitmore. The cameras cut to Karen, red-faced and hysterical, trying to spin the story. "This was an act of domestic terrorism," she shrieked, "a personal attack on my leadership." But the public wasn't buying it. Online comments poured in by the thousands. HOA Karen finally got what she deserved. Mayor's lawn Lexus is the greatest story of 2025. Whoever planned this deserves a medal. By nightfall, the mayor had issued a statement condemning Karen's reckless conduct. He fined her personally for property damage to his lawn, threatened further legal action, and quietly pulled his support from her HOA antics. In one day, Karen went from queen bee to national laughingstock. Her power base crumbled. Neighbors who once cowered under her clipboard now mocked her openly. Kids rode their bikes past her house, chanting Mayor's lawn Lexus like it was a new nursery rhyme. And me, I sat on my porch, bourbon in hand, watching it all unfold with the satisfied calm of a man who had played the long game and won. But the real victory wasn't just the car or the lawn or even the memes. The real victory was this: for the first time in years, the neighborhood saw Karen for what she truly was. Not a leader, not a protector, just a bully in a bathrobe undone by her own arrogance. The helicopter had flown her power away, and it wasn't coming back. The morning after the mayor's lawn Lexus incident, Maple Crest felt different. Lighter, quieter, like someone had finally cracked open a window in a stuffy room. For years, Karen's voice had been the soundtrack of our neighborhood, her shrill lectures, her threats disguised as reminders, her footsteps pacing sidewalks with clipboard in hand. But that Sunday morning, silence. Nah pink tracksuit, nah sunglasses glinting like weapons, nah Lexus. Instead, the cul-de-sac buzzed with something new: laughter. Jenkins strolled past my roses, chuckling under his breath. The teenagers who once dreaded her rules now biked circles in the street, chanting Mayor's lawn Lexus like it was the chorus to a summer anthem. Parents waved at me, some timidly, some boldly, like I had just slain the dragon for them. Karen, of course, tried to fight back. She called an emergency HOA meeting Monday night, striding in with her hair lacquered stiff and her pride stitched together with tape. But the room wasn't hers anymore. I was there, sitting in the back, sipping water, and watching as the board members shifted uncomfortably under her glare. "We must restore order," she barked. "That man," she jabbed her pen toward me, "is a menace to this community. He staged a terrorist stunt against my property and our mayor." The board didn't clap. They didn't nod. They just stared. Finally, one member, a woman Karen used to bully over mailbox paint, spoke up. "Karen, you parked your car across his driveway. That's illegal. You brought this on yourself," the room murmured. Karen's face turned red. She sputtered excuses, but the tide had turned. For the first time in her reign, the board voted against her. They stripped her of her presidency that night, leaving her standing alone, clipboard trembling like a dethroned monarch. By Tuesday, the mayor had filed charges against Karen: trespassing, public nuisance, property damage. He fined her thousands of dollars for the ruined lawn. The city attorney threatened to dig deeper into HOA corruption. Suddenly, Karen wasn't Maple Crest's queen. She was its cautionary tale. And me, I went back to living my life. I trimmed my roses when I felt like it, not when she demanded it. I parked my truck in my own driveway without fear of another pink slip. I grilled burgers on my porch while neighbors waved instead of whispering. One evening, Jenkins joined me for a drink. He stared out at the cul-de-sac, still chuckling. Never thought I'd see the day, he said. Karen taken down by a helicopter. I smiled. Sometimes you've got to fight fire with fire, or in this case, ego with altitude. He clinked his glass against mine. Legendary. But I'll be honest, as sweet as the victory was, it wasn't about humiliating Karen. Not really. It was about balance. About showing that bullies can't win forever no matter how loud, no matter how entitled. About proving that if you push good people too far, eventually they'll push back. Karen never apologized. She slunk around for a while, avoiding eye contact, muttering about unfair treatment. Eventually she sold her. Lexus probably couldn't stand the sight of it after the memes, and by the end of the year she sold her house too. The day the moving truck pulled away, neighbors stood on their lawns waving not with sadness but with relief. The air smelled fresher, the birds sang louder. Maple Crest was free. And as I stood by my roses, bourbon in hand, I thought about the whole saga. About the helicopter, the chains, the roar of the blades. About Karen's scream as her Lexus rose into the sky. About the crowd's laughter when it landed on the mayor's lawn. And I thought sometimes the best revenge isn't quiet. Sometimes it's loud enough to shake the whole neighborhood. And sometimes it even flies. If there's one thing this whole saga taught me, it's this: bullies thrive in silence. They count on people being too polite, too tired, or too afraid to push back. Karen ruled Maple Crest for years because most of us just rolled our eyes, muttered under our breath, and paid the fines. She mistook that silence for power. But power built on fear is fragile. The moment someone shines a light on it, the whole illusion crumbles. And that's exactly what happened when her Lexus flew over Maple Crest and crash-landed metaphorically and literally on the mayor's lawn. Now, I'm not saying everyone should go out and rent a helicopter, but I am saying this: don't let small tyrants dictate the quality of your life. Whether it's an HOA president, a boss, or just a toxic person in your orbit, you have more tools than you think. Creativity, courage, and a little bit of humor can go a long way. At the end of the day, standing up to bullies isn't about revenge, it's about dignity. It's about reminding yourself and everyone watching that you're not someone to be stepped on. So tell me, what's the worst HOA or neighborhood story you've ever witnessed? Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this tale, hit subscribe, because trust me, there are plenty more HOA dramas to come.